The stagecoach door hung open like a broken jaw, and Beatrice Walsh stood in the middle of the dusty New Mexico road with nothing but the clothes on her back and fear clawing at her throat. She had jumped from the moving carriage 3 miles outside Roswell, her silk wedding dress catching on the door handle and tearing clean up the side as she tumbled into the dirt. Her mother's scream still echoed in her ears, but Beatrice didn't look back. She couldn't. 1 more mile, and she would have been delivered to Harold Pemberton like a prize mare, 23 years old, and sold off to settle her father's gambling debts to a man twice her age with hands that lingered too long and breath that reeked of whiskey and cruelty. The September sun beat down mercilessly as she ran, her boots kicking up plumes of red dust that coated her ruined dress. The year was 1885, and respectable women didn't run through the desert alone, didn't defy their fathers, didn't break promises made in parlors over brandy and cigars. But Beatrice had stopped caring about respectability the moment she overheard Harold telling his friends what he planned to do to her on their wedding night, how he'd break her spirit like he broke his horses. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled, until the road curved around a cluster of rocky outcroppings, and she could no longer see the dust trail of the stagecoach. Then she collapsed against a boulder, gasping for breath, her dark hair falling from its careful pins to hang in sweat-dampened tangles around her face. That was when she heard the horse. Beatrice scrambled to her feet, pressing herself against the rock as a rider came around the bend. He sat tall in the saddle, a working cowboy by the looks of him, with a weathered hat pulled low against the sun and a brown gelding that looked steady and strong. He reined in sharply when he saw her, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle at his saddle before he registered that she was alone and clearly no threat. "Madam." His voice carried the slow drawl of someone who'd spent more time talking to cattle than people. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. "You all right?" Beatrice tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She managed only a small shake of her head. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, pulling a canteen from his saddle. He approached slowly, like she was a spooked animal, and held it out to her. "You look like you've been through hell, pardon my language." She took the canteen with shaking hands and drank deeply, the water warm and metallic but the most wonderful thing she'd ever tasted. When she finally lowered it, she found him watching her with concern creasing his forehead. "Thank you," she managed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you." "Madam, I think I should be saying that to you." He gestured at her torn dress, the scratches on her arms, the wild desperation that must have been written all over her face. "What happened? Were you robbed? Is the rest of your party hurt?" Beatrice looked down at herself and almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. "No, nothing like that. I jumped out of a stagecoach." His eyebrows rose. "On purpose, on purpose." They stared at each other for a long moment. Beatrice waited for judgment, for him to tell her she was foolish or demand to know where her husband was. All the things men usually said to women who stepped outside the neat lines drawn for them. Instead, he said, "Must have been a pretty good reason." Something in her chest loosened at those words. "They were taking me to my wedding, to a man I don't want to marry." The cowboy's expression shifted, understanding dawning in his eyes. He'd probably heard stories like hers before, women bartered and traded like livestock. It was the way of things, especially among families with money and debts to settle. "I'm James Caldwell," he said after a moment. "Most folks call me James. I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles north of Roswell. Beatrice Walsh. Most folks called me B before I ran away from them." A hint of a smile crossed his face, there and gone like a shadow. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Walsh, though I wish it was under better circumstances. He glanced back down the road, then at the sun sliding toward the western horizon. They'll be coming back for you soon. The stagecoach, I mean. Ice flooded her veins. She hadn't thought that far ahead, had only known she needed to run. Yes, yes, they will. So you've got a choice to make. James settled his weight back on his heels, his hands resting loosely on his gun belt. You can wait here for them to find you, go to that wedding like they want. Or you can come with me. Come with you where? Roswell's not a big town, but it's big enough to lose yourself if you know how. I know the owner of the boarding house, Mrs. Chen. She's fair-minded and doesn't ask too many questions. She might have work for you, or at least a place to stay while you figure out what's next. Beatrice studied him, this stranger offering her an alternative to the future she'd been running from. He had an honest face, she thought, or maybe she was just desperate enough to convince herself of that. Why would you help me? James was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Had a sister once. She got married off to a man who wasn't kind to her. By the time I was old enough to do anything about it, she'd already lost too much of herself to ever get it back. He focused on Beatrice again. So I reckon if I can help another woman avoid that fate, I ought to try. The sound of hoofbeats and carriage wheels reached them faintly on the wind. They both turned toward the sound, still distant but growing closer. I need to decide now, don't I? Beatrice said. Yes, madam. She thought of Harold Pemberton, of his possessive grip on her arm, of the life that waited for her back in Santa Fe with her parents who'd chosen their debts over their daughter. She thought of the unknown stretching before her, terrifying and vast and free. I'll come with you. James nodded once, sharp and decisive, and moved to his horse. Can you ride? Yes, but not in this dress. He didn't hesitate, just shrugged out of his duster and handed it to her. Put this on, cover up that white silk. We'll stay off the main road until we're closer to town. Beatrice wrapped herself in the coat, which smelled like leather and sage and honest sweat. James swung back into the saddle, then reached down to pull her up behind him. She hiked her skirts as best she could and settled behind the saddle, her arms wrapping around his waist as they took off at a canter across the open desert. The stagecoach came into view behind them just as they crested a small rise. Beatrice saw her mother's face pressed against the window, saw Harold standing outside with his hand shading his eyes, scanning the landscape. Then James guided the horse down into a dry wash, and they were hidden from view, following the winding path away from the road and toward a future Beatrice couldn't yet imagine. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of hoofbeats and the leather creaking of the saddle. Beatrice kept her eyes on the landscape rolling past, the endless expanse of scrub brush and red earth, the mountains rising purple in the distance. She'd spent her whole life in cities and towns, in parlors and gardens and carefully maintained spaces. This wildness felt both frightening and intoxicating. "You all right back there?" James called over his shoulder. "Yes, just thinking. About how I have no money, no belongings, and I'm running away from one of the wealthiest families in Santa Fe. They're not going to just let this go." She felt him tense slightly beneath her arms. "How much money are we talking about?" "Enough to hire men to come looking for me. Enough that Harold won't want to lose face by letting his bride escape." James let out a long breath. "Well then, we'll need to be smart about this." He glanced back at her, those green eyes serious. "I helped you run, Miss Walsh. That makes me part of this now, whether we like it or not. If they find you, they'll know someone helped you. I've got no love for men who treat women like property, so I'm in this with you until we figure out how to keep you safe." Warmth spread through Beatrice's chest, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. "You don't even know me." I know enough." They rode on as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. When the buildings of Roswell finally appeared on the horizon, James slowed the horse to a walk. "We need to think about your story," he said. "Folks are going to ask questions. Mrs. Chen especially. What should I tell them? Truth's usually best when you can manage it, but maybe not all of it. You're running from an arranged marriage, that part's true enough. But we don't need to mention how wealthy your family is or that you jumped from a moving stagecoach. We'll say you were traveling to visit relatives, decided you didn't want to go through with the marriage, and I offered to help you find work in Roswell instead." Beatrice nodded against his shoulder. "That's close enough to the truth. Can you do any kind of work? Sewing, cooking, teaching?" "I can read and write well. I can do basic sewing, though nothing fancy. My cooking is adequate but not exceptional. I'm better with numbers and ledgers, actually. My father used to let me help with his accounts before." She trailed off. "Before he sold you to settle his debts," James finished quietly. "Yes." They entered Roswell as the last light was fading from the sky. It was bigger than Beatrice had expected. A proper frontier town with wooden sidewalks and false-fronted buildings lining a main street that curved alongside the Hondo River. Lamplight glowed in windows, and she could hear piano music drifting from one of the saloons. James guided the horse down a side street to a two-story building with a neat sign proclaiming it to be Chen's boarding house. He dismounted and helped Beatrice down, her legs shaky after the long ride. She was acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, the torn dress visible beneath his too large coat, her hair a mess of tangles. "Let me do the talking at first," James said, tying the horse to the hitching post. "Mrs. Chen can be prickly with strangers, but she trusts me." The front door opened before they reached it, and a small Chinese woman appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. She was probably in her 50s, with sharp eyes that took in everything at once. Her gaze moved from James to Beatrice and back again, her expression unreadable. "James Caldwell," she said, her English accented but clear. "You show up at my door after dark with a strange woman in a torn dress. This should be interesting." "Evening, Mrs. Chen. I know how this looks, but it's not what you're thinking." "I'm thinking you helped someone who needed help." "Am I wrong?" James smiled. "No, madam, you're not wrong." Mrs. Chen stepped aside, gesturing them in. "Then come inside before the whole town starts gossiping. Lord knows they don't need any help from me." The boarding house was clean and simply furnished, with a sitting room to one side and a dining room to the other. The smell of something savory lingered in the air, making Beatrice's stomach clench with hunger. She realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast, a lifetime ago in a different world. Mrs. Chen led them to the dining room and pointed at the chairs. "Sit. I'll bring tea and food, then you'll tell me what's going on." She disappeared into what Beatrice assumed was the kitchen. James pulled out a chair for Beatrice before taking the seat across from her. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly now. He had a strong face, not traditionally handsome but striking in its honesty, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow and calluses on his hands when he'd helped her down from the horse. "She seems kind," Beatrice ventured. "She is, under all the gruffness. Lost her husband 10 years back and took over the boarding house. She's tough as nails but fair." Mrs. Chen returned with a teapot and cups, followed by a plate of bread and cold chicken. She poured tea for all of them with efficient movements, then settled into a chair at the head of the table. "Now talk." James laid out the story they'd agreed upon, keeping his voice matter-of-fact. Mrs. Chen listened without interruption, her dark eyes fixed on Beatrice most of the time. When he finished, silence settled over the table. Finally, Mrs. Chen spoke. This man you were supposed to marry, he'll send people looking. Beatrice swallowed hard. Yes, almost certainly. How many people, I don't know. However many it takes, probably, Mrs. Chen nodded slowly, turning her cup in her hands. I had an arranged marriage too back in China. I was luckier than most. My husband was a good man and we grew to love each other, but I knew other girls who weren't so lucky. She looked directly at Beatrice. You were right to run. Relief flooded through Beatrice so strongly she felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If you stay here, you'll need to earn your keep. I can't afford charity even for runaways from bad marriages. Can you clean? Yes. Cook adequately. What about keeping books? I hate ledgers, always have. Mine are a mess. Beatrice sat up straighter. I'm good with numbers. I could manage your ledgers. Mrs. Chen's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Then we have a deal. You work for me, keep the books, and help with whatever else needs doing. In exchange, you get a room and meals. The pay won't be much, but it'll be enough to start saving. That's more than fair. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Call me Alice. If we're going to be living under the same roof, might as well use first names. She pushed the plate of food toward Beatrice. Eat. You look half-starved. Beatrice didn't need to be told twice. The food was simple but delicious, and she ate with an appetite born of fear and exhaustion and relief all mixed together. James watched her with quiet satisfaction, sipping his tea. What about you? Alice asked him. You planning to get involved further, or was this a one-time rescue? James shifted in his chair. I figure they'll be asking around town soon enough, looking for her. Might be I should keep an eye out, make sure no trouble comes calling. You're not responsible for her, Alice said, but her tone was gentle. I know, but I'd like to help anyway if that's all right with both of you. Beatrice met his gaze across the table. There was something steady in those green eyes, something she found herself wanting to trust. I'd appreciate that, though I don't want to put you in danger. I can handle myself. He finished his tea and stood. I should get back to the ranch. Boss'll wonder where I've been. What will you tell him? Beatrice asked. That I helped someone who needed it. Sam's a good man. He won't make trouble. Alice showed James to the door while Beatrice finished eating. She could hear them talking in low voices, though she couldn't make out the words. When Alice returned, she picked up the empty dishes with brisk efficiency. That James Caldwell is a good man, she said. Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but solid. You could do worse for an ally. I barely know him. Sometimes that's when you see people most clearly, when they help you and get nothing from it but trouble. Alice headed toward the kitchen, then paused. Your room is upstairs, second door on the left. There's water for washing and clean sheets on the bed. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do about clothes and everything else. For tonight, just rest. Beatrice climbed the stairs on legs that felt like water, exhaustion crashing over her now that the adrenaline had worn off. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. She stripped off the ruined wedding dress, washed as best she could, and fell into bed wearing only her chemise. Sleep came quickly, but it was troubled. She dreamed of stagecoaches and grasping hands, of running through endless desert while something dark and terrible chased her. She woke before dawn, heart pounding, and lay staring at the ceiling as gray light crept through the window. What had she done? She'd thrown away everything for freedom, but what did freedom mean when you had nothing? No money, no family, no prospects beyond a job keeping ledgers in a boarding house in New Mexico. Harold would be furious. Her parents would be devastated, or at least her mother would. Her father would probably just be angry about the money he still owed. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't see any of them. She saw James Caldwell's steady gaze, his quiet offer of choice instead of certainty. That was worth something, wasn't it? The right to choose, even if what you chose was harder than what you left behind. She rose and dressed in the ruined gown because it was all she had, then made her way downstairs. Alice was already up, working in the kitchen, and she took one look at Beatrice before shaking her head. "We'll need to do something about clothes today. I've got some things that might fit you with alterations, not fancy but serviceable. I can't afford, you'll work it off. Don't worry about that now." Alice handed her a cup of coffee, strong and black. "Drink this, then I'll show you the ledgers. Might as well get started earning your keep." The morning passed in a blur of numbers and columns. Alice's ledgers were indeed a mess, but the work was straightforward enough. Beatrice lost herself in organizing the chaos, finding a strange comfort in the orderly march of figures across the page. This was something she was good at, something she could control. She was still working when a knock came at the front door just before noon. Alice went to answer it, and Beatrice heard a man's voice, unfamiliar and stern. Her hand froze above the ledger, pen dripping ink onto the page. "I'm looking for a young woman," the voice said. "Dark hair, early 20s, might have arrived in town yesterday. She would have been wearing a white dress." Beatrice's blood turned to ice. They'd found her already. Alice's voice was perfectly calm. "I run a boarding house, sir. I see lots of people. What's your interest in this woman?" "She's my fiancée. She had some kind of nervous fit and ran off before our wedding. Her family is very worried." "I see. Well, I haven't seen anyone matching that description, but I'll keep my eyes open." "What's your name in case she does turn up?" "Harold Pemberton. I'm staying at the hotel on Main Street." "I'll let you know if I hear anything, Mr. Pemberton." Beatrice heard the door close, then Alice's footsteps approaching the dining room. The older woman appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. "He's here already. That was faster than I expected." "What do I do?" Beatrice's voice came out as a whisper. "You stay out of sight for a few days. Don't go outside. Don't show yourself at windows. I'll spread the word to people I trust that no one's seen you." Alice crossed her arms. "This man, he described you as his fiancée having a nervous fit. That tell you anything?" "That he'll never admit I left by choice. He'll say I'm ill, confused, need to be brought home for my own good." "Men like that usually do." Alice's expression softened. "Don't worry, you're safe here. I didn't survive this long by giving in to bullies." Over the next 3 days, Beatrice became a ghost. She stayed in her room or worked on the ledgers in the dining room, always away from windows, always quiet. Alice brought her meals and news from town. Harold was asking questions everywhere, showing a photograph of Beatrice to shopkeepers and saloon owners. He'd brought 2 men with him, rough-looking types who made people nervous. "He's offering a reward," Alice reported on the 3rd evening. $50 to anyone who's seen you." Beatrice's hands shook as she set down her fork. "That's a lot of money." "It is. But most folks in Roswell don't take kindly to strangers throwing their weight around. He's making more enemies than friends with his attitude." "What about James? Has he come by?" "Saw him at the general store yesterday. He said to tell you he's keeping watch." Harold tried to question him, but James said he'd been working at the ranch all week, hadn't seen anything unusual. Beatrice felt a pang of guilt. James was lying for her, putting himself at risk. "I shouldn't have involved him. He involved himself. That was his choice, same as running was yours." On the 4th day, James came to the boarding house just after sunset. Alice let him in through the back door, and Beatrice met him in the kitchen, acutely aware that she was wearing one of Alice's old dresses, her hair in a simple braid down her back. She looked nothing like the desperate woman he'd pulled onto his horse 5 days ago. "Evening," he said, pulling off his hat. "Wanted to check how you were holding up." As well as can be expected, I suppose. Alice says Harold is still in town. He is, but he's getting frustrated. Searched half the town already, questioned anyone he could corner. He doesn't seem to believe that no one's seen you. James leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. I've been thinking, this can't go on forever. Eventually he'll search here too, and then what? I don't know. Beatrice wrapped her arms around herself. I've been trying not to think about it. There might be another option. James glanced at Alice, who nodded encouragingly. It's not a perfect solution, but it would protect you legally. What is it? He met her eyes directly. You could marry someone else. If you're already married, he can't force you into a wedding with him. Your family couldn't either. Beatrice felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Marry someone else. Who? The silence that followed answered her question before James spoke. Me, if you'd be willing. It would be a marriage of convenience, purely legal. We could have an understanding between us about what it means and doesn't mean. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. His voice was steady, measured. Look, I know it's not an ideal situation. We barely know each other. But I've seen what men like Harold do to women, and I won't stand by and let it happen if I can prevent it. This would be a legal protection. We'd work out the details however you want. Beatrice looked at Alice, who was watching her with knowing eyes. What do you think? I think James is offering you the same thing you wanted 5 days ago when you jumped from that stagecoach. A choice. Alice moved to put the kettle on, her movements deliberate. But it's your decision, not mine. Beatrice turned back to James. He looked uncomfortable but determined, his hat clutched in his hands. He was offering her safety, protection, freedom from Harold. But marriage, even one of convenience, was still marriage. What would this arrangement look like? She asked carefully. However you want it to. We could live separately if you prefer. You stay here, keep working for Alice. I stay at the ranch. We'd be married on paper, nothing more unless you ever wanted it to be. He shifted his weight. I'm not asking for anything from you except the chance to help. You can say no and I'll understand. We'll figure out something else. Why would you do this? James was quiet for a long moment. I told you about my sister. What I didn't say was that she died 2 years back. Her husband finally went too far one night when he was drunk. By the time the doctor got there, it was too late. His voice roughened. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can save you. Tears stung Beatrice's eyes. She thought about Harold, about the life of quiet misery that awaited her if he dragged her back. She thought about James, this cowboy who'd given her water in the desert and asked nothing in return except the chance to keep her safe. If we did this, she said slowly, I want to be honest about it. Not tell people it's just convenience, but actually try to build something real between us. Not rushing anything, but not pretending either. Would that be all right? James's expression shifted, something warm flickering in his eyes. Yes, madam, that would be more than all right. Then yes, I'll marry you. Alice clapped her hands together once, sharp and decisive. Good. We'll do it tomorrow morning. I know the preacher, and he owes me a favor. The less time Harold has to interfere, the better. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the September sun already warm by the time Beatrice came downstairs in a simple blue dress Alice had altered to fit her. Her hands were shaking as she tried to pin her hair up, and finally Alice took over arranging it into a neat bun. Nervous? Alice asked, terrified, but not of James, of everything else. That's natural. You're taking control of your life. That's always scary. James arrived at 8, wearing clean clothes and looking as nervous as Beatrice felt. He'd brought wildflowers, desert marigolds and purple asters, and handed them to her with an awkward smile. Figured you should have flowers, even if this isn't a traditional wedding. The gesture made something in Beatrice's chest ache. Thank you. They're beautiful. The preacher's house was a short walk from the boarding house. Reverend Thomas was an elderly man with kind eyes who asked no questions when Alice explained the situation in vague terms. He performed the ceremony in his front room, with Alice and his wife as witnesses, reading from a worn Bible in a gentle voice. When it came time for the vows, James took Beatrice's hands in his. They were rough from work, warm and steady, and she found herself holding on tighter than she'd meant to. I, James Caldwell, take you, Beatrice Walsh, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I, Beatrice Walsh, take you, James Caldwell, to be my lawfully wedded husband. The words felt surreal, like something happening to someone else. But when James slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring he'd clearly bought that morning from the general store, the reality of it settled over her. She was married, to a man she'd met 5 days ago. And somehow it felt right. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Thomas said. James hesitated, looking at Beatrice for permission. She nodded slightly, and he leaned in to press a chaste kiss to her lips. It was brief, respectful, but Beatrice felt warmth spread through her at the contact. They signed the marriage certificate, making it official and legal. Beatrice Caldwell, she wrote, testing out her new name. It felt strange and new and liberating all at once. "Congratulations," Reverend Thomas said, shaking their hands. "May God bless your union." They walked back to the boarding house in silence, the marriage certificate safely tucked in James's pocket. Alice had gone ahead to give them privacy, and for the first time since they'd met, Beatrice was truly alone with the man who was now her husband. "Are you all right?" James asked as they paused outside the boarding house. "I think so. It doesn't quite feel real yet." "I know what you mean." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly awkward. "Listen, I meant what I said. We can take this as slow as you need. I'll stay at the ranch like always. Come visit regular so folks see we're really married. But there's no pressure for anything more." "What if I want more?" The words came out before Beatrice could stop them, surprising them both. James looked at her with something like hope in his eyes. "Then we'll figure it out together, but only when you're ready." Before Beatrice could respond, a familiar voice cut through the morning air. "There you are." They both turned to see Harold Pemberton striding toward them, his face flushed with anger. The 2 rough men Alice had mentioned flanked him, their hands resting on their gun belts in a way that made Beatrice's blood run cold. "Beatrice, thank God I found you." Harold's voice dripped with false concern. "Your mother has been beside herself. Come along now, we'll get you home and sort out this unfortunate episode." James stepped slightly in front of Beatrice, his posture relaxed but ready. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Pemberton." Harold's eyes narrowed. "And who might you be?" "James Caldwell, Beatrice's husband." The words landed like a physical blow. Harold's face went from flushed to pale and back to flushed again, mottled with rage. "Husband, don't be ridiculous. She's engaged to me." "Not anymore." Beatrice found her voice stepping out from behind James. "I married James this morning. It's legal and binding. You can't have. You're not in your right mind. Your family will have this annulled immediately." "My family has no say in who I marry. I'm 23 years old, well past the age of consent." Beatrice's hands were shaking, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not going back with you, Harold. Not now, not ever." Harold's expression turned ugly. "You little fool, do you have any idea what you've done? Your father owes me $20,000. That was the agreement, you for the debt." "Then I suggest you take it up with my father, since he's the one who made the agreement." Beatrice lifted her chin. "I never agreed to anything." One of Harold's men moved forward, but James's hand dropped to his gun. "I wouldn't. This is a public street. An assault is still illegal even for rich men." Several townspeople had stopped to watch the confrontation, drawn by the raised voices. Beatrice recognized some of them from Alice's descriptions. Local business owners and residents who'd been pestered by Harold's questions all week. "You're making a mistake," Harold said, his voice low and venomous. "Both of you, I have resources, connections. I'll make your lives hell. You're welcome to try." James's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "But you might want to consider how it'll look. A wealthy man from Santa Fe harassing a legal marriage in Roswell. Folks here don't take kindly to that sort of behavior." Harold looked around at the watching faces, clearly calculating his options. Finally, he jabbed a finger at Beatrice. "This isn't over. Your father will hear about this and he'll deal with you accordingly." "I'm not afraid of my father anymore," Beatrice said, and realized it was true. Harold stalked away, his men following. Beatrice watched him go, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. When he disappeared around the corner, her legs gave out and James caught her before she hit the ground. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe." "You did so well." Beatrice clung to him, breathing in the scent of leather and sage that she was coming to associate with safety. "He's going to come back. He won't let this go." "Maybe not. But he can't undo a legal marriage, and he knows it. The worst he can do now is make noise, and noise fades eventually." Alice appeared in the doorway. "Bring her inside. Lord knows she's earned some rest after that." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Alice made tea and food that Beatrice couldn't eat, while James sat nearby, a steady presence that helped calm her racing thoughts. By evening, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving her exhausted and wrung out. "I should get back to the ranch," James said reluctantly. "But I'll come by tomorrow, make sure everything's all right. You don't have to keep protecting me. We're married now like we planned. Harold can't do anything." "I know, but I want to." He stood, reaching for his hat. "Besides, we're married now. That means we ought to spend time together, get to know each other properly." Beatrice smiled despite her exhaustion. "I'd like that." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. James would visit the boarding house every few days, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes just stopping by to check on Beatrice. They'd talk about everything and nothing, slowly peeling back the layers of their lives for each other. Beatrice learned that James had grown up in Texas, lost his parents to fever when he was 16, raised his younger sister on his own until she married. He drifted west working cattle drives until he settled at the Double R Ranch 3 years ago, saving money with some vague dream of buying his own land someday. James learned that Beatrice had grown up in comfort but not happiness, her parents more concerned with social standing than their daughter's well-being. She loved numbers and order, found peace in organizing chaos. She'd never been in love, had barely been courted properly before her father announced her engagement to Harold. "What did you want?" James asked one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sun set. "Before all this, what did you dream about?" Beatrice considered the question. "I wanted to matter, not as someone's daughter or someone's wife, but as myself. I wanted to do something useful with my mind instead of just sitting in parlors making polite conversation." She glanced at him. "That probably sounds strange. Not to me. I wanted the same thing, more or less. To build something that was mine that I could be proud of. Do you think we can have that? Even with how things started between us?" James was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the darkening sky. "I think we've got as good a chance as anyone, maybe better. We chose each other in a way. Not for love or money or family pressure, but because we wanted to help each other have better lives. That seems like a decent foundation to build on." Beatrice reached over and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. It was the most intimate contact they'd had since the brief kiss at their wedding, and she felt James's surprise in the way his hand tensed before relaxing into hers. "I'm glad it was you," she said softly. "That day on the road, I'm glad it was you who found me." James squeezed her hand gently. "Me too." Word came a week later that Harold had left Roswell, returning to Santa Fe empty-handed. The news should have brought relief, but instead Beatrice felt a strange flatness. The crisis that had defined her life for weeks was over, and now she had to figure out what came next. "You seem thoughtful," Alice observed one morning as they worked together in the kitchen. "Just trying to figure out where I go from here, what my life looks like now. What do you want it to look like?" Beatrice considered as she kneaded bread dough, her hands working the rhythm Alice had taught her. "I want to be useful. I want to matter to someone. I want—" She trailed off, uncertain. "You want a real marriage with James," Alice finished, "not just the legal kind. Is it obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes. The way you light up when he visits, how you've started wearing that wedding ring like you mean it instead of like it's a costume piece." Alice smiled. "There's no shame in falling for your own husband, even if you married him for practical reasons." "What if he doesn't feel the same way? Then you're blinder than I thought. That boy looks at you like you hung the moon and stars." Alice dusted flour off her hands. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" That evening, when James came by for his usual visit, Beatrice asked if they could take a walk. They strolled along the river as twilight fell, the water running low in the late autumn dry spell. "James, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy?" "With how things are between us, I mean." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I'm content. More than content, actually." "Why do you ask?" Beatrice took a breath, gathering her courage. "Because I want more. Not because I need protection or because I'm grateful, but because I've come to care for you. Genuinely care for you. And I want to know if you might feel the same way." James's expression shifted, going soft in a way she'd never seen before. "I've been trying not to feel that way because I didn't want to pressure you. But yes, I feel the same. I think I started falling for you the moment you told me you jumped out of a moving stagecoach rather than marry someone you didn't choose." Relief and joy flooded through her. "So where does that leave us?" "I reckon it leaves us building a real marriage instead of just a legal one." He reached out to cup her face gently. "If that's what you want, it is. More than anything." This kiss was different from the one at their wedding. It was slow and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Beatrice felt like her whole world had shifted into sharper focus. "I don't want you staying at the ranch anymore," she said. "I want you here with me, really with me." James smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his whole face. "I'll talk to my boss tomorrow, see if I can work something out where I'm only at the ranch during the day." They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and when James kissed her goodnight at the door, Beatrice felt like she was finally exactly where she was supposed to be. The next day, James spoke with Sam Rogers, the owner of the Double R Ranch. Sam was understanding, even congratulatory, and agreed that James could continue working there during the day as long as he was reliable. It meant long hours and hard riding back and forth to town, but James didn't complain. That first night he stayed at the boarding house. They were both nervous as teenagers. Alice had tactfully given them the larger room at the end of the hall, moving Beatrice's meager belongings earlier in the day. When James arrived after dark, dusty from the road, Beatrice met him at the door with a basin of warm water and a shy smile. "Thought you might want to wash up." "You're a saint." He cleaned up in the kitchen while Beatrice paced upstairs, her heart hammering. When he finally climbed the stairs and entered their room, she was standing by the window, backlit by lamplight. "We don't have to rush anything," he said gently. "We can just sleep, talk, whatever you're comfortable with." She turned to face him. "I know, but I want this." I want us to be married in every way, not just on paper." James crossed the room slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. When he reached her, he took her hands in his, thumbs brushing over her knuckles. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Beatrice felt herself melting into him. They fumbled with buttons and laces, laughing nervously at their own awkwardness, until finally they tumbled into bed together. It was tender and uncertain and absolutely perfect, two people learning each other in the most intimate way possible. Afterwards, Beatrice lay in James's arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "I never imagined marriage could be like this." "Like what?" "Chosen. Equal. Based on something real instead of obligation." James pressed a kiss to her hair. "We're lucky, I think, to have found each other. Do you believe in fate?" "Never did before, but maybe I'm starting to." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Beatrice woke in the morning to find James still there, his arm draped over her waist, she felt a contentment she'd never known existed. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to their lives. James worked at the ranch during the day while Beatrice managed Alice's ledgers and helped around the boarding house. In the evenings, they'd have dinner together, sometimes just the two of them, sometimes with Alice and whatever boarders were staying. Then they'd retreat to their room, where they'd talk for hours about everything under the sun, slowly building the foundation of a real marriage. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," James said one night as they lay in the darkness. Beatrice thought for a moment. "I used to steal books from my father's library. Not because he'd forbidden me to read them, but because he didn't think I was smart enough to understand them. I'd read philosophy and economics and political theory, then put them back before he noticed. It made me feel powerful knowing things he didn't think I knew. That's why you're so good with numbers. You taught yourself. Mostly. I had tutors for the basics, but everything else I learned on my own." She turned to face him in the dim light. "Your turn. Tell me something." "I'm afraid of horses." Beatrice laughed. "You're a cowboy who's afraid of horses. Not afraid exactly. More like deeply respectful of their ability to kill me." His voice was amused. "Got kicked in the head when I was 12, nearly died. Took me years to get back on one, and I've never fully trusted them since. I'm just good at hiding it. But you work with them every day." "Because I wasn't going to let fear dictate my life. Seemed like a cowardly way to live." Beatrice kissed him softly. "You're the bravest person I know," says the woman who jumped out of a moving stagecoach. They made love again, slower this time, learning what made each other gasp and sigh. Beatrice had never felt so safe, so cherished, so completely herself with another person. In early November, a letter arrived from Santa Fe. Alice brought it to Beatrice with a worried expression, the envelope thick and cream-colored, bearing her father's seal. "You don't have to read it," Alice said. "Could just burn it and be done with it." But Beatrice took the letter, her hand steady. "No, I should know what it says." She waited until James came home that evening to open it. They sat together on their bed, and she broke the seal with fingers that only trembled slightly. The letter was from her mother, not her father, written in the careful script Beatrice knew so well. Her mother wrote that she was sorry, that she should have fought harder against the engagement, that she'd been weak when Beatrice needed her to be strong. She wrote that her father was furious about the broken engagement, that Harold had indeed pursued the debt, and her father had been forced to sell off significant assets to pay it. The family's social standing was ruined, and they were now living in a much smaller house with reduced circumstances. But then, at the end, her mother wrote something unexpected. "I don't blame you for running, my darling girl. I blame myself for not having your courage. I hope you found happiness in your new life, wherever you are. You deserved better than what we tried to force upon you." Beatrice finished reading and sat in silence, tears streaming down her face. James pulled her close, letting her cry against his shoulder. "She's sorry," Beatrice managed. "After everything, she's sorry. You want to write back? I don't know. Part of me wants to tell her I'm all right, that I'm happy. But part of me is still so angry at both of them for putting me in that position. You don't have to decide now. Take your time, figure out what feels right." Beatrice tucked the letter into the drawer of their small dresser, where it stayed for several weeks while she sorted through her complicated feelings. Finally, in late November, she wrote a brief response. She told her mother she was well, that she'd married a good man, that she was building a life in New Mexico. She didn't give details, didn't provide an address for a response. It was enough to ease her conscience without opening a door she wasn't ready to walk through. Winter came early that year, with snow falling on Roswell by mid-December. The boarding house was cozy and warm, and Beatrice found herself falling into a comfortable routine. She'd become essential to Alice's operation, managing not just the ledgers but also helping with menu planning and even some of the cooking. Several regular boarders had commented that the meals had improved significantly since she'd arrived. "You've got a gift for organization," Alice told her one afternoon as they planned the week's shopping. "Ever think about running your own business someday?" "I can't say it's crossed my mind. What kind of business?" "Whatever kind interests you." "But you're wasted just keeping books, talented as you are at it. You could do more." The idea planted itself in Beatrice's mind and took root. What would it be like to run something of her own, to build a business from the ground up? She mentioned it to James that evening as they prepared for bed. "What do you think? Is that completely impractical?" James pulled off his boots, considering. "I don't think it's impractical at all. What kind of business would you want?" "I'm not sure. Something useful, something that helps people. You could start a bookkeeping service. Lots of small businesses struggle with their accounts. You could manage their books for a fee." Beatrice turned the idea over in her mind. "That could work. I'd need to build up clients, establish trust. Start small. Offer to help a few people for reduced rates, build a reputation. You've got time to grow it slowly." Over the next few months, that's exactly what Beatrice did. She put out word through Alice's network that she was available for bookkeeping services, and slowly clients began to appear. First the general store, then the hotel, then several of the smaller shops around town. She was fair in her pricing and meticulous in her work, and word spread that Beatrice Caldwell was someone you could trust with your accounts. By spring, she had enough regular clients that she was earning decent money of her own, money she saved carefully in a tin box under their bed. It gave her a sense of pride and independence she'd never experienced before. "I'm thinking about buying property," she told James one evening in April as they walked along the river. The cottonwoods were leafing out, and the air smelled of new growth and possibility. "What kind of property?" "A small office, maybe. Somewhere I could meet clients instead of working out of the boarding house. Nothing fancy, just a room with a desk and proper filing cabinets." James's expression turned thoughtful. "I've been saving too, from the ranch work. I've got enough put by that we could maybe look at land instead of just an office." "Land for what?" "A homestead. Maybe a small ranch of our own eventually. It's been my dream for years, but it seemed impossible until now." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "But we could build something together. A home that's really ours, a business, a life. If that's what you want." Beatrice's heart swelled. "Yes, that's exactly what I want." They spent the summer looking at properties, riding out on James's horse to survey available land. In July, they found it. 160 acres about 10 miles north of Roswell, with a decent creek running through it and enough grassland to support cattle. There was a small cabin already built, rough but sturdy, and James thought he could add on to it over time. The purchase took most of their combined savings, but when they signed the deed and it bore both their names, Beatrice felt like she'd finally planted roots. This was theirs, built together from nothing, a future they were choosing day by day. They moved to the homestead in late August, a full year after Beatrice had jumped from that stagecoach. Alice cried when they left, though she tried to hide it, and made them promise to visit regularly. "You've become like a daughter to me," she told Beatrice, pressing a package of food into her hands. "Don't be a stranger. Never. You saved my life, Alice. I won't forget that." The first months on the homestead were harder than Beatrice had anticipated. The cabin was small and primitive, with none of the conveniences she'd grown used to at the boarding house. Water had to be hauled from the creek. Cooking was done over an open fire or the tiny cast iron stove, and the wind howled through gaps in the walls at night. But there was freedom in it, too. She could walk outside and see nothing but open land stretching to the horizon, theirs to shape however they wanted. James built her a small office addition to the cabin, and she continued her bookkeeping business, riding into town twice a week to meet with clients. They bought their first cattle that fall, a small herd of 20 head that James tended with careful attention. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Beatrice learned to rope and brand alongside him, her hands developing calluses and her skin darkening from the sun. "You look happy," James observed one evening as they sat on the porch they'd built together, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "I am happy. Happier than I ever imagined I could be." Beatrice leaned against his shoulder. "A year ago, I was running away from a life I didn't choose. Now I'm running toward one I'm building with my own hands." "Our hands," James corrected gently. "Our hands," she agreed. In December, Beatrice realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another 2 weeks to be sure before telling James, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. "I think I'm pregnant," she said one evening after dinner, the words tumbling out in a rush. James froze, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." He set down the cup and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "How do you feel about it? Terrified, excited, everything all at once?" She searched his face. "How do you feel?" "The same." A smile broke across his features, slow and wondering. "We're going to have a baby." "We're going to have a baby," Beatrice repeated, and then she was laughing and crying at the same time while James held her close. The pregnancy was difficult, especially in the isolated homestead. Beatrice continued her bookkeeping work as long as she could, but by March, she was too uncomfortable to make the trip to town regularly. James worried constantly, hovering over her until she finally told him to stop, or she'd lose her mind. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I'll be fine." But when her labor started on a hot July night, fierce and sudden, James rode for the doctor in a panic. Alice came too, taking charge with the competent efficiency Beatrice remembered from the boarding house. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Beatrice thought she might not survive it. But finally, as dawn light crept through the windows, she delivered a healthy baby boy with a strong cry and a full head of dark hair. "He's perfect," James breathed, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel, after James's boss at the ranch who'd been kind when they most needed it. Samuel James Caldwell, born July 15, 1887, into a life his parents were still building together. The years that followed were full and challenging and deeply satisfying. The ranch grew slowly but steadily, and Beatrice's bookkeeping business became well established enough that she could be selective about her clients. Samuel grew from a colicky baby into a curious toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. When Samuel was 2, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier despite the added challenge of caring for a young child. Their daughter was born in April of 1889, a fierce little thing with James's green eyes and Beatrice's stubborn chin. They named her Rose after the town where their story had begun. 2 children, Beatrice marveled one evening as she nursed Rose while Samuel slept in James's arms. A real family. The family you chose, James reminded her, not one forced on you. As the children grew, Beatrice told them stories about how she and their father met. She softened some of the details for their young ears, but the core truth remained. Their mother had been brave enough to run toward freedom, and their father had been kind enough to offer her a choice. "Will you tell them everything someday?" James asked. "About Harold, about your family, all of it, when they are old enough to understand, yes. I want them to know that you can choose your own path, even when it seems impossible, especially when it seems impossible." The homestead prospered. By 1892, they had a proper house with 4 bedrooms and a real kitchen, built with money from the cattle sales and Beatrice's business. James hired help for the ranch work, 2 young cowboys who reminded Beatrice of James when she'd first met him. Quiet, hardworking, dreaming of their own futures. Alice visited regularly, doting on the children and scolding Beatrice for working too hard. "You've got 2 babies and a business and a ranch. You're going to wear yourself out." "I'm happy, Alice, truly happy. That's worth being a little tired." In 1894, a letter arrived that Beatrice had been half expecting for years. Her mother had died peacefully in her sleep, and her father was writing to inform her. The letter was stiff and formal, but at the end, he'd added a brief postscript. "Your mother often spoke of you. She hoped you were well." Beatrice cried when she read it, mourning not just her mother's death, but all the years they'd lost to pride and stubbornness. James held her while she grieved, and when she'd finally cried herself out, she wrote a response to her father. It was brief but not unkind, acknowledging his letter and offering condolences. She never heard from him again, but that was all right. The family she'd built here was enough. Samuel started school in Roswell when he turned 6, riding into town with James twice a week. He was bright and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. Rose, at 3, was already showing signs of being equally sharp-minded. "They get that from you," James told Beatrice one evening as they watched the children play. "They get their kindness from you," she countered. "Then they're lucky in their parents." Beatrice leaned into him, content. "We're the lucky ones, to have found each other, to have built all this." By 1896, when Samuel was 9 and Rose was 7, the ranch was thriving. They had over 100 head of cattle, 3 hired hands, and a reputation for quality stock. Beatrice's bookkeeping business had evolved into a consultation service, helping new businesses set up their accounting systems. She'd even written a small manual on basic bookkeeping that the general store sold for her. "You should be proud of yourself," James told her one evening as they reviewed the year's finances. "Look at everything you've accomplished." "We've accomplished," she corrected. "None of this would have been possible without you. I gave you a choice on a dusty road. You did everything else yourself." Beatrice thought back to that day, 11 years ago now, when she'd been desperate and alone with nothing but fear driving her forward. She thought about the stagecoach, about Harold's grasping hands, about her parents who'd valued debt over their daughter's happiness. And then she looked around at the life she'd built. The comfortable home, the thriving business, the children reading by lamplight, the husband who'd offered her choice instead of certainty, and then chosen to build a life alongside her. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if someone else had found me that day, she mused. If you'd taken a different road or I'd run in a different direction. But I didn't, and you didn't. We found each other exactly when we needed to. Do you ever regret it? Marrying a stranger to protect her, James pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Not for a single second. You were never a stranger, Bea. From the moment I saw you standing in that desert, determined and terrified and brave, I knew you were someone special. Marrying you was the easiest decision I ever made. Everything after, that's been the adventure. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, they made love with the easy familiarity of long partnership. Afterwards, Beatrice lay in James's arms and thought about how far they'd come. I love you, she said softly. I don't think I say it enough, but I do, completely and entirely. I love you too. Have for years now, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened. One day I just realized that you weren't just my wife or the mother of my children or my business partner. You were the person I wanted to tell everything to, the first face I wanted to see in the morning and the last at night. That's love, I think. That's love, Beatrice agreed. The years continued to roll past, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Samuel grew tall and serious, with James's quiet strength and Beatrice's head for business. Rose was fierce and independent, already declaring at 10 that she wanted to be a lawyer when she grew up. Never mind that there were hardly any female lawyers in the whole country. Let her dream, Beatrice told James when he worried about Rose setting herself up for disappointment. I never thought I'd escape an arranged marriage and end up running my own business on a cattle ranch. If I taught our daughter anything, I hope it's that the impossible is just difficult, not insurmountable. In 1899, as the century drew to a close, Beatrice stood on the porch of their home and looked out over the land they'd built together. She was 37 now, with silver starting to thread through her dark hair and lines around her eyes from squinting into the sun. James stood beside her, his arm around her waist, grayer and more weathered but still strong. 14 years, Beatrice said, since that day on the road. Best 14 years of my life, mine too. Samuel came around the corner of the house leading a horse, Rose trailing behind him arguing about something related to saddle placement. They'd grown so much, these children who'd never known anything but the freedom their parents had fought for. You think they understand how lucky they are? James asked quietly. Not yet, but they will someday. When they're older and they look back and realize that their lives could have been so different, that their mother could have been trapped in a loveless marriage, that their father could have ridden past a desperate woman in the desert. Beatrice turned to look at him. That's when they'll understand that every choice matters, every moment of courage or kindness can change everything. That evening, the whole family sat down to dinner together. It was something they did every night, all 4 of them around the table James had built, sharing food and conversation. Samuel talked about a new calf that had been born that day. Rose announced she'd finished reading every book they owned and needed more. James discussed plans for expanding the herd, and Beatrice listened to all of them, her heart full of gratitude for this life she'd never imagined possible. Later, after the children were in bed, she pulled out the old wedding dress she'd kept all these years. It was still stained and torn from her tumble out of the stagecoach, a relic of the worst day of her old life and the first day of her new one. Why do you keep that? James asked, watching her fold it carefully back into the trunk. To remind myself of where I came from, what I was willing to risk for freedom, and to remember that the best things in life often start with the hardest choices. No regrets, not a single one. You." James pulled her to her feet and into his arms, swaying gently like they were dancing to music only they could hear. "My only regret is that I didn't find you sooner. We found each other exactly when we needed to. That's enough." They stood together in the lamplight, two people who'd started as strangers bound by necessity and become partners bound by choice and love. Outside, the New Mexico night was vast and star-filled, the same sky that had watched over a desperate woman and a kind cowboy on a dusty road 14 years ago. The children grew and eventually left home. Samuel took over running the ranch with his father, bringing in new ideas and modern techniques. Rose did become a lawyer, one of the first female lawyers in New Mexico, fighting for women's rights and making her mother cry with pride at every victory. James and Beatrice grew old together on the land they'd built. They added grandchildren to their family, 5 in total, and watched their children build lives as full and free as their own had been. On their 30th wedding anniversary, James took Beatrice back to the spot where they'd met. They were older now, moving slower, but they rode out together on a crisp September morning to stand in the same place where their story had begun. "If I'd known," Beatrice said, looking at the dusty road that seemed so much smaller now, "that jumping out of that stagecoach would lead to all of this, I'd have jumped sooner. If I'd known that helping a stranger would give me the best life imaginable, I'd have thanked you instead of offering you water." They stood hand in hand, remembering the fear and desperation, the tentative trust, the slow building of something real and lasting. The choice that had changed everything. "I'd do it all again," Beatrice said. "Every hard moment, every scary decision, all of it, to end up here with you." "Me too," James agreed. "Every single minute." They rode back home as the sun climbed higher, to the house full of memories and the life they'd chosen together. That evening, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, they celebrated 3 decades of marriage with food and laughter and love. When the party was over and they were alone again, Beatrice and James sat on their porch watching the stars emerge. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," James said, echoing the game they'd played so many years ago. Beatrice smiled, taking his weathered hand in hers. "I knew I loved you the night you offered to marry me, not because you were rescuing me, but because you offered it as a choice, not a command. That was the moment I knew you were different from every other man I'd ever met. I knew I loved you the day after our wedding, when Harold confronted us and you stood up to him. You were shaking so hard I thought you might collapse, but you didn't back down. That's when I knew you were the bravest person I'd ever meet." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of partnership. Inside, a grandchild laughed, the sound carrying clearly through the open windows. "We did good, didn't we?" Beatrice asked. "We did better than good. We built something beautiful, and it was true." From a desperate moment on a dusty road, they'd built a life full of love and purpose and choice. They'd raised children who understood the value of freedom, created a business that served their community, established a ranch that would outlast them both. But more than any of that, they'd found each other. A woman running from an arranged marriage and a cowboy who offered her a choice instead. And from that choice, they'd built everything that mattered. As the years rolled on, they remained devoted partners. When James's health began to fail in his 70s, Beatrice cared for him with the same fierce love that had defined their marriage. When he passed peacefully in his sleep at 76, she mourned deeply, but without regret. They'd had 44 years together, years full of joy and struggle and unwavering partnership. Beatrice lived another 8 years after James died, staying on the ranch surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She continued working with numbers until the very end, her mind sharp even as her body failed. On her last day, Rose sat beside her bed holding her hand. "Tell me the story again, Mama, about how you and Papa met." And Beatrice, with her last strength, told the story one more time. About the stagecoach and the desert and the cowboy who'd offered her water and kindness when she most needed it. About the choice that had changed everything. "Remember," she told Rose, her voice fading, "that you always have a choice. Even when it seems impossible, even when you're terrified, you can choose your own path. I did, and it gave me everything worth having." Beatrice closed her eyes for the last time, surrounded by love, having lived a life she'd chosen herself. And in the end, that choice, made in desperation on a dusty New Mexico road so many years ago, had made all the difference. The ranch continued under Samuel's care, then his children's, a lasting legacy of two people who dared to choose freedom over security, love over obligation, hope over fear. And though the original homestead cabin eventually crumbled, and the old house was updated with modern conveniences, the story remained. In Roswell, New Mexico, they still told it sometimes. The tale of Beatrice Walsh, who jumped from a stagecoach rather than marry a man she didn't choose, and James Caldwell, who offered her a different future. It became the kind of story people told their daughters, a reminder that courage and kindness can create something beautiful, that the hardest choices often lead to the best lives. And somewhere in the red New Mexico dirt, in the wind that still blew across the open range, the echo of that first meeting remained. A desperate woman, a kind stranger, and a choice that changed everything. From that moment of crisis came a love story that lasted a lifetime, built on mutual respect and shared dreams, and the simple, profound truth that everyone deserves the right to choose their own destiny. That was their legacy, greater than land or money or success. They proved that love built on choice and respect could last, that women could be more than property, that kindness mattered, that courage was worth the risk. And in the end, that was everything.